It's been a tough week. It's been a tough couple of months, year. In difficult times, so often my first response is to say, let's take a deep breath. But even that doesn't quite feel like enough right now. It's smoky, irritates our lungs. When I've been talking with you all this week, with also family and friends, I've heard people say things from like, this is so scary, to I can't believe this is happening, to I just feel numb. And when I think about it all together, it seems as though collectively we're lamenting. Now, the word lament gets used sort of offhandedly sometimes. This week I told one of my friends that I had ruined a favorite pan. I cooked on it for too long. I had gotten distracted, and now there's this like thick layer of black goo on the bottom that I can't quite get off. Well, that's lamentable, he said. Other examples like this are, it's lamentable that kids these days don't learn how to respect their elders, or I just lament that college is so expensive these days. And it makes sense to use lament here. We worry about these things. We wish that they were different. It would be great if people all respected one another. And, I, for one, would be totally okay if college costs less. What would life be like without student loans? But this almost casual way of using the word lament, while it's technically correct, doesn't get to like the deepest meaning of this term. A passionate expression of grief or sorrow, to mourn, to express fully and deeply a sense of loss. When I think of the word lament, I think about it in terms of our faith. I think of this passage from Jeremiah. A cry goes out in Ramah. Rachel is weeping for her children. She is weeping because they are no more. And Ramah was a place that after the battle over the city of Jerusalem, those who weren't killed, those who were taken captive by the Babylonians, were moved before they were then exiled to Babylon. So lament, this kind of crying out, deep regret, grief, or sorrow, and we find that throughout the Bible, and we've talked about this before, right? We have the Book of Lamentations, which is all about the grief that the people of Israel experienced when they were exiled in Babylon. We hear lament throughout the books of the prophets. Then there's Job. He says, why did I not perish at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? That's how he cries out to God, because his life is so tough. And then we have examples in the New Testament as well, right? Mary and Martha that are grieving over their brother. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is lamenting that God is asking him to get on the cross. And then on the cross, Psalm 22, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? So Psalm 22, that's a notable psalm, but there's actually laments throughout the whole book of Psalms. There, I think about a third are considered to be laments in some form or another. And so our psalm for this morning, how long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? It begins. For many of us, this is a psalm we can really relate to right now. As if the coronavirus pandemic, the economic insecurity that people are experiencing, the racial unrest in our country, the political divisions were not all enough. Now there are destructive wildfires burning all around us. This place that we love, the beauty of creation all around us, is burning. People's homes are burning. Lives are being lost. Some friends of my family lost their home. They were living in Blue River. It's just gone. And there's people in our congregation who have been evacuated. So far, their houses are safe, but they're just waiting to see what will happen. We're glad that they're out of the path of the fire and safe, with family and friends. But as we breathe in this smoke and ash, safe, settled, those might not be feelings that we can access right now. We are waiting to see the totality of this destruction with like a pit in our stomachs. If ever there was a time to say, "How long, O Lord?" I think now might be it. In an interview he did a number of years ago, musician Bono suggested that it might be a good spiritual exercise for us to write psalms ourselves. He says the psalms are, an expression that people of their time, laments or poems of joy that they were singing about their circumstances. But he said, we can write psalms based on what we are going through. And so I put together a psalm for our time, using words I've heard from so many of you throughout this last week. So psalm for our time might sound something like this. God, really? One more thing? The virus, the wildfires, are the locusts next? I'm at a level of emotional exhaustion that leaves me numb, unable to process the thick smoke outside my window. These fires are scary. The spread of this virus leaves me anxious. All of my regular rhythms are gone. The patterns of my life feel unfamiliar. Life itself feels unstable. Your black and brown children are being killed. Your creation is threatened. There is violence all around our land, and those trying to help are often in harm's way. It feels as though there's no possibility of reconciliation for your people. And now this? How long will this go on, Lord? When will it end? When will the sun brighten our world again? And of course, many of us have personal realities that we could add to this soliloquy of sorrow. Life doesn't stop when we feel overwhelmed. There's a line in one of my favorite movies, A Few Good Men, that comes to mind, and it's made even more poignant because when I was writing the sermon, it was 9/11. And the hits just keep on coming. Now, when we talk about Psalms and about the lament Psalms, we highlight that they never end on a note of hopelessness. The classic lament ends with an expression of trust in the Lord. Psalm 13 is no exception. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. It would be easy for us to tack on a note of hope to the psalm we just read. But we know you are with us, Lord. That's our reflex, isn't it? When we feel overwhelmed or when things feel difficult, it's tempting to say, well, we just need to trust God. But we know other people have it worse. So we just need to, buck up and deal. And for some, that might be an authentic response. And to you, I say this. You are beacons of hope in our midst. So hold on to that light that's shining within you so that the rest of us who are still suffering can see it. But for those who that doesn't feel true to our experience right now, I want to share 3 thoughts with you. First, God can take your sorrow. The book of Psalms shows us that, God can hear all the cries of our hearts, the good, the bad, everything in between. And we share our joys with God without a second thought, right? So why would we not share the things that are difficult for us, to share our hearts when they're breaking with the one in whom we live and move and have our being? God can handle our grief, our anger, and our sorrow. And it does not mean that we are not people of faith. It does not mean that we're being unfaithful to God. we express this kind of grief and lament. Number 2, two things can be true at once. It can be true that people in Syria or Chicago or Blue River or insert another place here have it worse than us. Most of us have a level of privilege that keeps us from the deepest depths of difficulties in life, right? That we have support systems and we have one another. However, other people's suffering does not mean that we can't experience suffering too. So this week, as we have felt these feelings of just despair, as we see not only the state of the world, but the smoke outside our windows, we might too be suffering, even though there are those whose suffering is perhaps more intense than ours. So, it doesn't work that way that if one person is suffering, another person can't be, right? We're human. We have our experiences. And so we don't need to just get over it. We can be honest about what's going on with us. Thought number 3. We were not there when the original Psalms were written. We do not know if the writer of Psalm 13 sat down one day and just wrote out his whole psalm in one sitting, or if he began his lament in one time, one very difficult time in his life, and then came back much later, once the difficulties had resolved, and wrote his line about trusting in the Lord. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. Might have been written years apart. We don't need to pressure ourselves to get back to being okay. We can be right where we are, and wherever we are, God will be with us. But that doesn't have to be our confession today. The gospel lesson I chose for this morning might seem a bit odd at first. I just remarked that God will be with us, and then there's this gospel lesson where Jesus is talking about leaving his disciples. But here we also see Jesus giving the disciples a vision of what they can always cling to, what no virus or crisis or fire can ever take away: the love that we share with one another. I give you a new commandment, Jesus says, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. The psalmists, the ones who lamented, they still refused to believe that God had stopped loving them. And they hung in there with the people of God. One way we tangibly experience the love of God is in community. As we help one another, help our neighbors, outside of Eugene and Springfield, as we call one another and check in with one another, as we pray for one another, we are the living embodiment of God's love in one another's lives. It is a fitting time right now to lament, or to just be numb, unsure how to process all that is happening all around us. But at the same time, for those of us with emotional energy to spare, it is a time to hold the candle of hope up for those who are struggling to see the light through the smoke. God has not stopped loving us, our fellow human beings, or our earth home and all of its creatures. So whether we write the end of our psalm today, or at an untimed down the road when we come up for clean air that we can share with one another, perhaps our psalm might end something like this. But you, God, have shown yourself to me in the love of my neighbors. You are in the new growth amidst the burned out trees. I see you in the children, playing together without masks and without distance. You have revealed yourself in the breaking of the bread as I gather with my friends around your Son's table. You have brought me through a time when I thought the difficulties would never end. In you I will live and breathe for all of my days, and my heart shall rejoice in your salvation. Amen.